how much work remains. How can you carry on the fight for equal rights? Women's struggle for equal rights is centuries old. But 1848 marked a watershed moment for women's rights with the Seneca Falls Convention, where women activists publicly petitioned for their civil, social, political, and religious rights. In 1893, New Zealand sent a message to other activists across the world that equal voting rights were achievable through advocacy. Entering the 20th century, women around the world are mobilizing in ever greater numbers to campaign for gender equality, just as women's role in the labor force is rapidly evolving by opening up options beyond caretaking roles. In 1945, the United Nations is formed in response to the destructive toll of 2 world wars, and Eleanor Roosevelt oversees the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For all the world to hear, she and other advocates underline the place of women's rights within. This sets a foundation for women's rights norms and standards at the international level. In the subsequent decades, just as women are taking historic leadership positions in government, women activists at the grassroots level dovetail with the worldwide momentum by becoming powerful symbols of feminist resistance and social change. This momentum reaches a climax in 1995 when the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action presents a visionary global agenda for women and girls' rights. But in spite of all the progress, as we enter the 21st century, patriarchal stigmas persist and exemplary leaders arise to resist them. With the rise of the digital age, social media emerges as a crucial tool to galvanize populations in the fight against injustice. A single woman's voice is now louder than ever. Grassroots activists trigger social movements online and offline, from cities to villages, inspiring future generations of women and girl leaders. After relentless campaigning, these movements generate changes in policy that signal a true shift in international attitudes and practice towards equal rights. Where are we now? A quarter century after the Beijing Declaration, women and men must mobilize together to overcome the remaining obstacles to gender equality. They must fight for an end to gender-based violence, for access to healthcare, for equal pay, and for equal participation in political life. The ink isn't dry. Be a part of generation equality, and let us continue to write history together.
I will now make a statement as the President of the General Assembly from the rostrum. Mr. Secretary General, distinguished speakers, excellencies, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the high-level meeting to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the 4th World Conference on Women. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not often face issues that each one of us must personally address. It's very rare that each member of the society has a role to play to make the world a better place. It's even rarer that when each one of us takes a small step, we can achieve a huge change. This is why I would like to make a call to each and every one of us today. First, to the leaders we will hear from later today. I urge you to continue taking action to meet the challenges of a rapidly developing world. Your commitment to adapt in order to meet the needs of the people we serve is what will enable us to accelerate the realization of gender equality. It's up to us to bridge the digital divide, to provide for girls' education, to facilitate equal economic opportunity for women, to end the scourge of gender-based violence. Second, to those of us here in the General Assembly Hall, the onus is upon us to shift this status quo. Your pen, your voice, and your votes have the power to shape society. Here in this hall, you speak not for yourself, but for those who have entrusted you to sit behind your national placard. You are expected to fulfill the aspirations of the world. In the past session alone, representatives here at the United Nations have adopted resolutions on the girl child to prevent violence against women migrant workers, to improve the situation of women and girls in rural areas. Let us build upon this normative development. I call on all member states to implement these resolutions. This requires more than legislation. We need to shift established norms. Each one of us must uphold our individual responsibility to create a more just world. This is critical to sustaining peace, facilitating sustainable development, and upholding the rights of the people we serve. Third, to the civil society leaders who are joining us around the world, I thank you. We would not be here without you. 25 years after you gathered in Beijing, it's critical that you continue to raise your voice. You understand the complexity of the issues. You are the experts. We need to hear from you. Your work in communities, bridging divides, and filling existing gaps is even more critical as we contend with global pandemic. Indeed, if it were not for COVID-19, you would have been here in the General Assembly. But fear not, your seats remain open. Fourth, to the healthcare and social workers who have worked tirelessly throughout the pandemic, in particular the women who make up 70% of the labor force, we thank you. Women humanitarians have shaped the course of the world throughout history, or, if you will permit me, her story. Fifth, to all members of the United Nations system, including our peacekeepers, who are working every day to uphold the rights of women and girls in the most challenging environments. Please do not tire. We know that change takes time. Now is the time to up the ante. Sixth, to everyone around the world, I urge you to accept this simple fact. A woman in power is not a threat. It is time that men and women realize that when we embrace and celebrate diversity, we all prosper. When the needs of women who have been forcibly displaced are addressed, we are all safer. When women are engaged in peace processes, we are more likely to have lasting peace. When we break barriers and stereotypes, we can achieve what we never thought possible. Seventh, to the boys around the world, know that you are equal in every way to your sisters. You are no better or worse, but you have an extra responsibility to make space, to listen, to learn to be an ally. It's up to us to recognize our privilege. And finally, to my granddaughters and all girls around the world, know this: there is nothing that women cannot do. Dare to be the first. Dare to do what no woman has done before. We need more women in power. There is power in a podium. There is power in information, data, and science. There is power in your words. There is power in sharing your lived experience. There is power in an outstretched hand. There is power in solidarity. Never doubt your personal power. Assert your power. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to ask the question: when will we reach full gender equality? In 2030? On the 50th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference for Women? On the centenary of the United Nations? Why wait? Let us take action today to ensure equality tomorrow. It's up to you. It's up to all of us. We need the full buy-in from governments, civil society, the private sector, the United Nations, and you at home. The power of multilateralism is fueled by individual actions. by decision makers at all levels. It's time to level the playing field. Each and every one of us has the opportunity and power to make a change. I trust that we are in this together. Thank you very much. I now invite the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, to make a statement.
Monsieur le Président, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers amis, à vous tous, bonjour et bonsoir. C'est un plaisir de m'adresser à vous à l'occasion du 25e anniversaire de la 4e conférence mondiale sur les femmes. La conférence de Pékin a été un moment charnière, un point de repère, un tournant. Pour beaucoup d'entre nous, ce fut un temps de réflexion profonde. La vision audacieuse et l'agenda de transformation de la conférence de Pékin ont tout d'abord clairement montré que les droits des femmes sont au cœur de l'égalité et de la justice partout dans le monde.
But they also highlighted that these rights are often denied, trampled upon, and flouted worldwide. This was an alarm bell ringing.
Since then, we have made some important gains. Maternal mortality is down by nearly 40% since 1995. More girls are in school than ever before in history. But we have not fulfilled the ambitious vision of the Beijing Declaration. One woman in three still experiences some form of violence in her lifetime. Every year, 12 million girls marry before the age of 18. In some parts of the world, levels of femicide, the killing of women, could be likened to a war zone. In 2017, an average of 137 women around the world were killed by a member of their own family every day. And women are still frequently excluded from peace negotiations, climate talks, and decision-making roles of all kinds. Worldwide, on average, women have just 75% of the legal rights of men. And the World Bank estimates that it could take 150 years to achieve gender parity in lifetime earned income. And that closing that gap would generate $172 trillion in human capital wealth. That is what we are all losing. Excellencies, COVID-19 has emphasized and exploited the continued denial of human rights. Women and girls are bearing the brunt of the massive social and economic impact of the pandemic. 25 years after Beijing, we are facing a women-led recession as women employed in the informal economy are first to lose their jobs. Women nurses and carers are on the front lines of the response to the pandemic, but men still occupy 70% of leadership roles in healthcare. And women are suffering a shadow pandemic of gender-based violence during COVID-19, together with an increase in abusive and repressive practices, including early marriage and the denial of sexual and reproductive health care. Unless we act now, COVID-19 could wipe out a generation of fragile progress towards gender equality. Excellencies, the systems and structures of our world, based on millennia of male domination, are holding women back in all areas with serious consequences for everyone. And COVID-19 demonstrates that we urgently need a strong push to meet the unfulfilled promise of Beijing. This is fundamentally a question of power. And so it starts with equal representation of women in leadership positions, in governments, boardrooms, in climate negotiations, and at the peace table. Everywhere decisions are taken that affect people's lives. Achieving these will require targeted measures, including affirmative action and quotas. This is a human rights issue and a social and economic imperative. I encourage all Member States to make concrete, time-bound and ambitious commitments to women's leadership and full participation. At the United Nations, we achieved gender parity in our leadership at the beginning of 2020, with 90 women and 90 men as full-time senior leaders. We are now working for parity at all levels, not only for the sake of our women staff, but because women's leadership and participation makes institutions like ours more effective, as we have seen in the response to the pandemic. Excellencies, COVID-19 is a catastrophe, but it is also an opportunity for transformative thinking that puts women front and center of the response and the recovery. Stimulus funds should put money directly into women's hands through cash transfers and credits. And governments should expand social safety nets to women in the informal economy and recognize the value of unpaid care work. I repeat my call for urgent, comprehensive action on gender-based violence. And the United Nations is working to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls, including through our partnership with the European Union, the Spotlight Initiative. Looking forward, we need transformative, women-led changes to the failed structures and frameworks exploited by the pandemic. That is the only way we will implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and achieve lives of dignity and opportunity for all. I also urge your support for the grassroots civil society organizations that have always been at the vanguard of women's rights movement. The upcoming Generation Equality Forum, co-hosted by the governments of Mexico and France, will be an opportunity to build networks and partnership for change. Excellencies, in recent times, we have seen around the world a pushback against gender equality and women's rights. Now is the time to push back against the pushback. And I would like to correct a common misconception. The Beijing conference did not only concern women, it concerned women, men, girls and boys. Women's full human rights and freedoms are fundamental to peace and prosperity on a healthy planet, for everyone, everywhere. I salute the visionary women and men who led the way 25 years ago. Let us finish what they started, and I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his statement. I now invite the Assembly to view the pre-recorded statement of the President of the People's Republic of China and host of the Fourth World Conference on Women, His Excellency Xi Jinping.
Mr. President, colleagues, on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, we gather to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women held in Beijing. The aim is to promote gender equality and women's development around the world. I'm glad to address this event, and I wish this high-level meeting a full success. In the ongoing fight against COVID-19, female medical and epidemic control workers, researchers, community workers, and volunteers of the world, braving danger and working around the clock, have fought at the front line of the battle. With their dedication and ingenuity, they have written heroic epics of saving people and protecting lives. They truly deserve our admiration. In China, at the height of the battle against COVID-19, more than 40,000 health workers from across the country rushed to Hubei province which was the hardest hit by the virus, and 2/3 of them were women. Among them was a nurse from Guangdong province who had not yet reached the age of 20. Answering a reporter's question on whether she was too young to help others, she said, "The moment I put on the protective suit, I'm not a kid anymore." Those words moved the whole nation. In fact, many women medical workers in China, like this girl, and in their tens of thousands, have taken on the virus bravely by putting themselves in harm's way. Their courage and hard work have shown the very best of the medical profession. Their devotion and sacrifice have kept the nation intact through difficult times. The spread of COVID-19 worldwide has taken a heavy toll on the economy, employment, and people's life, and has brought greater challenges to women. In both containing COVID-19 and promoting post-COVID economic and social recovery, it is particularly important that we address the special needs of women and deliver on the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. To this end, China calls for taking the following steps. First, we need to minimize the impact of COVID-19 on women. We need to pay special attention to the health, social, and psychological needs and working environment of frontline women medical workers. We also need to place the protection of women's and girls' rights and interests high on the agenda of both public health and economic reopening. We need to serve the needs of special groups on a priority basis and give special care to women in difficulty. Second, we need to strive for genuine gender equality. Protection of women's rights and interests must become the commitment at the national level. As we pursue post-COVID recovery, we may create new opportunities for women to participate in decision-making and be more involved in national, economic, cultural, and social governance. We need to eliminate prejudice, discrimination, and violence against women, and make gender equality a social norm and moral imperative observed by all. Third, we need to ensure that women advance at the forefront of our times. In pursuing development, we need to protect women's rights and interests and improve their lives. We need to ensure that women are motivated, their creativity is unleashed to the full, and they truly feel satisfied, happy, and secure. We need to support women and help them live their lives to the full. Fourth, we need to enhance global cooperation in advancing women's development. China supports the UN in making women's development a priority. Our organization should do more, both to eliminate violence, discrimination, poverty, and other old problems, and to address new challenges such as bridging the gender-digital divide, so as to make women-related targets early harvest results of its 2030 agenda. 5 years ago, I proposed a global leaders meeting on gender equality and women's empowerment. Now, the host of proposals I put forward at the meeting for advancing global cooperation in this endeavor have all been implemented. In the coming 5 years, China will donate another $10 million to UN Women. China will continue to fund the UNESCO Prize for girls and women's education. China also proposes the convening in 2025 of another global leaders meeting on gender equality and women's empowerment. Colleagues, we still have a long way to go and need to work real hard to build a world in which women are free from discrimination as well as a society of inclusive development. Let us work together and redouble efforts to promote gender equality and advance the global cause of women's development. Thank you.
I thank the President of the People's Republic of China for his statement. I now invite the Assembly to view the pre-recorded statement of Ms. Pamzila Lambo-Nigutka, Executive Director of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women.
President of the UN General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action marked a new era in the fight for gender equality. It has led to major advances, including 274 legal and regulatory reforms in the 131 countries. Women now increasingly participate in peace processes. Gender-related crimes and conflict have been recognized and prosecuted under international law. The lives of women and girls have benefited from increased school enrollment and advances in maternal health and bodily autonomy. Recognition of the girl child as having distinct and different challenges has allowed harmful practices like FGM to be tackled. In 1945, the founding of the UN was a decisive and courageous moment. At that time, there was no women heads of state or government. In 1995 in Beijing, there were 12 women head of states. Today, we have 22 such women leaders amongst 193 countries. All in all, progress, but not yet enough and too slow. Women's leadership, including young women, is vital in the face of urgent need to rebuild better after COVID. Women and people of the world are demanding these changes. In the decade of action, in the context of SDGs, there is no longer excuses for these imbalances. Multilateralism and the UN are indispensable, and women believe in it, and that it must become even more inclusive. Women are now calling for a leapfrog to 50% representation or parity in all spheres, including cabinets, corporate boards, and throughout the economy, including women as beneficiaries of COVID-19 fiscal stimulus packages, and engagement in all peace processes and closing the digital divide. The basic key pieces are in place to roll back extreme poverty. We need to start now with Your Excellency's commitment at this commemoration to recapture and fast forward from the modest gain made since 1995, now under threat. We need big, bold steps, not incremental steps. This is the time for disruptors, young and old. Time for actions to change the course of history for women and girls, especially women between the ages 25 and 34, who are increasingly more likely to live in extreme poverty than their male counterpart. It's time to bring an end to discriminatory laws, norms, and homophobia, to end men's violence against women and girls, and a concerted effort to put women at the heart of climate justice. With that bold leadership must come unwavering political will, proportionate to the challenges, together with urgent investment to back the statements, especially investment in women's organizations, young feminists leading change, and women's ministries and agencies. Our Secretary General has shown how political will and decisiveness from the top can bring parity in UN senior management and amongst resident coordinators. We are at crossroads. The future needs a meaningful intergenerational engagement. All races, genders, and people of different abilities, so that everywhere in the world, a 10-year-old girl in 2020 will be a thriving young woman in 2030. I thank all those who are joining our multi-stakeholder forum, Generation Equality, including governments, civil society, private sector, youth, men and boys, leaders of action coalitions in our core chairs, France and Mexico, to tackle the unfinished business. And I salute civil society and youth for their radical, constructive impatience that will drive concrete change at scale to make sure we leave no girl or woman behind. We thank the UN for its irreplaceable capability to convene, especially in epoch moments, as it did in 1945, in 1995 in Beijing, and in 2010 when UN Women was born. The disproportionate impact of COVID on women in society and in the front lines, where women are the majority of those saving life, is an epoch moment. The women of the world believe in the UN and solidarity of nations, and that we, the peoples, all together can change the future. It is in our hands.
I thank the Executive Director of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women for her statement. I now invite Ms. Natalia Kanem, Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, to make a statement.
All right, that is the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women, a meeting to accelerate the implementation for advancing women's rights, currently on in New York. Very interesting what was stated in this particular meeting and anniversary there. The fact that women have 75% of rights as compared to men worldwide, and that will take over 100 years for us, in fact, to get to real gender equality, where we have 100% women's rights equality. And the fact that women are indeed bearing the brunt of this pandemic of the coronavirus. President of China, Xi Jinping, also addressing the delegation. They're saying that it is important to place women's issues high on the agenda. And of course, this is also the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which is by the UN seen as the most, according to the UN, seen as the most visionary agenda for achieving gender equality. And of course, we heard from our very own Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who is the UN Women's Executive Director, really starting off on a really positive note, though, about some of the inroads that have certainly been achieved when it comes to equality, talking about the fact that there is increased school enrollment for young girls, and that there are more women represented, for instance, in certain governments and in the different countries. So some positives there that we can certainly sort of tick off, but very important indeed, not in my lifetime anyway, to get to that 100% equality that we hope to certainly see. All right, so that is that meeting to accelerate the implementation for advancing women's rights that the UN is having currently, UN Women.